Hi, everybody. This is Lee, and I'm talking about an article I saw at The Root. This was written by Michael Harriot. Whatever happened to Black Lives Matter? And he's saying that it seems to have disappeared from public conversation. Barely a year ago, it seemed like the Black Lives Matter hashtag was spoken about. It was written about. It caused so much commotion that America had no choice but to take notice. Whether they supported it or hated it, everyone had an opinion of it. And it was on the evening news, it was on social media, it was argued about on shows like Sports Center. And so it seems to not be like that anymore. And so it seems like this author is saying that people don't seem to talk about it. And he wants to know, is it dead? Is it asleep? Have people lost interest? Why is it so quiet? Where did it go? And he's saying that it might be the propaganda used against it. That as soon as the Black Lives Matter movement began, that there was pushback from people on the other side. This pushback was a willful ignorance, and then a willful and a willingness to ignore statistics that actually inspired the Black Lives Movement. And they said that despite the statistics, that Black people needed to stop resisting. People who wanted to push back on the Black Lives Matter, they wanted to transform that conversation about police brutality into distractions and discussions about Black on Black crime. They wanted to use police union lawyers and governors to also change the conversation. The pushback convinced juries that trying to breathe while being choked to death was actually a form of resisting. And that getting a gun and shooting a youth who was walking away or running away with candy in his pocket was actually a form of standing your ground. And so this author is saying that perhaps Black Lives Matter is hiding because of how it has been demonized, the actual concept of it. That white America was fooled into thinking and repeating that Black Lives Matter was a hate group. And this is the same way that the civil rights movement was considered a hate group. The civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King. And I'll even add in here how people were convinced that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist because Ronald Reagan said so. This author is saying that people have been successfully brainwashed into believing that Black Lives Matter was anti-cop, even when one of the movement's founders said that no, it was not. People branded the Black Lives Matter as violent because burning and looting broke out during some demonstrations. Like the violence that broke out during the inauguration of Donald Trump and after the World Series or at certain Donald Trump rallies. And so he's saying that there are some things that should not be forgotten, and that is that there has never been a Black movement in the history of America that white people found acceptable and we'll even go as far back as escaping from slavery. That was not acceptable to white people. It was a form of resistance, and that was not approved. That the abolition movement, that was not approved. That the effort at reconstruction and building and advancement and equality of Black people, that was not approved. That the effort to combat, like Ida B. Wells, as I mentioned in a previous video, who campaigned against lynching and Jim Crow, that was not approved, and that she was attacked. And that the efforts of Martin Luther King was not approved. So for the most part. And then also other, Black Power movements were not approved. And so he's saying that this is historic. So the Black Lives Matter is basically getting the same treatment as the abolition movement, to tell the truth. And so it's almost like this author is saying that there are egos involved and a sense of privilege that makes some people want to stomp out anything that does not benefit them. And so that there's a reason why people want to replace the name All Lives Matter for Black Lives Matter. And that's a form of supremacy, because they cannot contemplate or fathom that Black Lives Matter doesn't mean only Black Lives Matter, or that Black Lives Matter more. They cannot fathom the idea that it's not against anyone. It's just a reminder that Black lives do matter for those who feel that they do not. And so he's saying that maybe politicians killed it, and that there are many politicians engaged in a concerted effort to make protests illegal now. And some of this has been in response to what's happening at the North Dakota pipeline with the indigenous population, the Sioux Nation, and water protectors and associated tribes. And then also that there have been a lot of protests concerning refugees and illegal immigrants and asylum seekers, and that there's an effort to restrict that protest, to criminalize protest, civil disobedience, and demonstrations. He's saying that lawmakers in Minnesota are advancing a bill that would make protesters pay for policing. The state of North Dakota was trying to make it okay for drivers to run over protesters with their cars. But he's saying that the state of Washington takes the cake, that they want to increase the penalty for protesting by rebranding it as economic terrorism. And if you have been watching the news lately, Kelsey Warren of Energy Transfer Partners, the Texas-based oil and gas company that's building Dakota Access Pipeline, has been using that term a lot, economic terrorism. And so, again, there's this concerted effort amongst legislatures, and then police forces, and then, of course, people like Kelsey Warren, to brand the protesters engaged in civil disobedience as terrorists. Much like Ronald Reagan attempted to brand Nelson Mandela as a terrorist. And he's saying that there's even a type of trolling of Black Lives Matter when states like Louisiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, and even California have passed or are considering passing the Blue Lives Matter bills that make attacks on police a hate crime. And I'll correct it here that it's actually not attacks on police, that obstruction and resisting are also included in that. And sometimes obstruction and resisting can even be walking too slow or looking a police officer in his eyes when he doesn't want to be looked at, or speaking in a way that the officer says, you know what, you're resisting or you're obstructing from your words. So it's whatever the officer decides that it is. And so this author is saying that 29 black men have already been killed by police this year, and that there are these new law and order executive orders that protect the police, and that the newest attorney general has a history of anti-black racism, and that he opposes almost every move by the Justice Department Civil Rights Division. And so, he's saying that the Black Lives Matter movement has just been attacked, and that there were many reasons why, including some of the Black Lives Matter people decided they were with her, even though she was with them who believes Blue Lives Matter. And so Donald Trump has proven to be a great distraction. There's many other things happening: the Women's March, the refugee, illegal immigrant crisis. That many other things are going on, and so maybe people have let it slip to the back of their minds, and that maybe people have just kind of let it slip by the wayside. And so I'll let people read this article and then contemplate for themselves what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. I am going to make another video following this one where I speculate that actually people have not forgotten, but that the resistance has changed into a different format. And we shall soon see if that's a format that will be effective. Good luck.